I grew up in a household that cultivated my artistic interest. My mother was an artist, and I was constantly surrounded by artwork and making and creating and doing. I always knew I was going to do something with art. I never ventured off that path. I got interested in digital culture because I wanted to focus on something relevant to myself and my generation. Living in rural Iowa can have its drawbacks, but the opportunities provided by the age of information and digital technologies make me feel connected to any part of the world at any time. In the 1960s, Jackson Pollock used abstract painting to show visual representations of energy and movement. I was interested in how that could contextualize itself in a digital age. What was I doing in my daily life that was movement that could be represented as a visual? And I was also taking a digital studies class, and in that class we were talking about the quantitative self movement and how people spend time with these programs that will track their daily actions. So I was interested in how a digital native who's constantly engaging with all these programs that manage my tasks for me, how does that translate into my daily actions? This process first begins with my everyday computer use. So whether I'm at work or at home, I take screen recordings of whatever I'm doing on the computer. The next thing that I do is I play it back and I put tracing paper over the screen, and then I use a Sharpie to just trace wherever my mouse was going. In tracing all of these mouse movements and taking so much time in creating them, my main goal is to contemplate every one of my actions in a world that really doesn't give me the time to do that. So when Jackson Pollock was making his work, he talked a lot about the inner forces of the self. What's interesting about the digital age is that our movements really can't be informed like that, especially when we're using the computer. Our movements in the digital age are informed by all the programs we're using and all the people who designed them and all the information that went into creating those programs. That resulting mark is then scanned into the computer, and I use it for various things. So one of the things that I use it for is I output it to the laser cutter and cut out these wooden objects. It's really interesting to watch the laser, especially when I think back to the start where I initially moved the mouse in this movement, and now the laser is creating that movement once again. And so the laser just amplifies the mechanical quality of this line work. And those wooden objects become their own solid form. So it's still this mouse movement and this remnant of this process, but now it's become its own existent object. And then I take it even a step further, and I'll do these prints where I take the woodcut object and send it through the press. So then the object is leaving its own remnant. So in making these prints, I'm doing relief woodcut printing, but because these objects are laser cut, they're a little more difficult to roll up. So just letting inconsistencies from regular printmaking become their own way of printing is important to the process. Putting them into these prints, they become, again, confined by a space. So similar to the way the computer screen frames the existence and how long these marks are, the print becomes the boundary of how much space they occupy. In experiencing digital technology, we're very stimulated. There's always a lot going on. You're hit with words and images and sounds all at once. I wanted to explore the collection of data as a print, because printmaking has its origins in individual experience of knowledge. When books were first printed, it was the first time that people were able to sit down with a piece of information and contemplate it by themselves. By slowing down and concentrating on one action over and over, the printmaking process allows me the time to contemplate each of my digital actions and their purpose. My artwork is about the process and how I get there, but it's also a lot about the object itself as a physical presence in my space and my response to the art after it's created. Douglas Rushkoff elegantly stated how when we learn to read, we also learned to write. In a digital age, we increasingly use these programs, which we are very excited about using, but we don't know how to create a world within the computer that is truly our own. Marketers and corporations have the most control over the ways in which we access and consume information, because they have the money to pay those who know how to write these programs. This relates to what I'm doing in my artwork because I'm paying attention to where my mouse movements go. I'm limited by my ability to maneuver within someone else's design. The end product is really about that I then have this time to look at what was produced from that and have a moment of self-reflection that's paused and it isn't interrupted by the overwhelming amount of information that was used to create it. Digital technologies have changed our sense of self. We now have numerical means for understanding our choices, our body, and our movements. And this really affects the personal journey and how we look at and talk to ourselves. I really like the way that literary theorist Richard Lanham said it. We are carbon-based creatures, not silicone bits. The more we seem to float away into informational space, the more we want to hug the ground. Digital culture isn't the first thing that I decided to explore as an artist, and it probably won't be the last. I don't think there's really any limitation to what these marks could become, and I will continue to explore different ways that they could emerge into being.